Hello, good afternoon. So I have this search open in front of me. I typed in the effect of mandates on the general public. Of course, this is in connection with COVID-19 and a couple of mandates, two different mandates. One is about masking, the other about vaccination. Just to preface this recording, I haven't rehearsed anything. I'm doing it in real time. I do have search results open. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 results open. And I'm not going to predict how long this video is, but I try to just make one point and not keep repeating it throughout the video. But before getting into this research, I would preface this by saying, like some people would do who are trained in using their instinctive powers, and they're not submitting to the methods of science, because science is about observation, studying results, reproducing results, and it goes through a process. That takes a different mindset. Instinct, on the other hand, or using common sense, is a totally different process. So let me say this. Those people who said there should be no masking mandates, they didn't go through a scientific process to come to that conclusion. Now, the motivation for the mandate or being against the mandate is complicated if you look into it. And that's where science helps. It will help you to investigate the theory behind the mandates, or the psychology behind the mandates. So, excuse me, science is a broad field, but all of this comes under science. There are hard sciences and there are soft sciences. And the soft sciences also have their place, but the soft sciences cannot take the place of the hard sciences. What I mean by that is, in the hard sciences you have the practical application in chemistry and in physics. And there, time and time again, regardless of who's doing the experiment, you get to reproduce those results. It doesn't matter what you believe. It will just keep on giving you the same result. You mix certain chemicals together under a certain pressure and temperature, and you get that particular compound. It doesn't matter what the belief of that person is who is doing the experiment. 100 different people will do the experiment. They follow the procedure. They get that result. In sorry, I have that cough. In physics, same thing. You do a certain experiment. Say, for instance, the application of physics is in the computer I'm using. So there's a processor that is working. And I expect, if I put the cursor here in the search box and I push on the space bar once, it moved one space. Now, the recommendation that came from Bing is different. I'm just demonstrating my command was to move the space one point. That's what it did. If I do the backspace, it moves back one point. It's a predictable result. If I'm not sitting here and someone else is, they do the same thing on the keyboard, same thing would happen. And it has to be reliable, it has to be repeatable. That is science. That's a hard science at work. Now, is there a need for this research? That is the point I'm trying to get at. Mandates are a political instrument. Excuse me. Now, should mandates have come into the picture? That is also a consideration. So where I will begin, and of course I'm going to put the links for all of these articles in the video description. But I'm going to look at them one by one. And interestingly, this from the Imperial College London. This is categorized under engineering, from what I can see, the highlighted tab. But the name of the article is Vaccine Passports Linked to COVID-19 Vaccine Hesitancy in UK and Israel. I had read this article earlier and shared it. And should I be reading the whole article? Not necessarily. But I will get to the important points here. So let's read the introduction here. A new study from Imperial College London has found a link between COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy and a perceived lack of free will over vaccine passports. The findings, taken from surveys of 1,358 people across the UK and Israel to highly vaccinated countries, found that people who feel their sense of autonomy or free will is unmet by government incentives like vaccine passports are less likely to take the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, interesting that this calls the vaccine passport an incentive. A lot of people would not even look at it as an incentive. They would rather look at it as a disincentive. That the government is giving them a passport where none was required. How is that an incentive? It to them would be more government control over their free movement, over their life. So not an incentive for a lot of people. Domestic vaccine passports, where people must prove their vaccination status to stay in hotels and attend events, for example, have been introduced across the world to restore freedom of movement within countries and encourage vaccination. However, this new study published in the journal Vaccines highlights that such public health incentives might affect people's vaccination decisions in unintended and undesirable ways. Vaccination is the single most effective way to reduce deaths and severe illness from COVID-19. And current vaccines have demonstrated high levels of protection against symptomatic infection. From here on, you can read more. I'm not going to read the whole thing because I want you to look at it yourself. What I'm going to read is somewhere a little later in the article. It says here, reading from here, then they measured attitudes towards vaccine passports by asking participants the extent to which they support three scenarios. A COVID passport enabling only fully vaccinated people to perform some social activities. A COVID passport enabling fully vaccinated or recently tested people to perform some activities. and mandatory vaccination for all residents. They found that people's willingness to get vaccinated correlated with their sense of autonomy. Participants who felt their need for free will was unmet were particularly unlikely to say they would take the vaccine. Now, this highlighted quote is, I believe, the spirit of the article. It's towards the conclusion of the article, but this is what is in a nutshell. Governments should focus on building a caring and trusting relationship with the public, rather than applying pressure and external controls. Professor Rafael Calvo, he's from the Dyson School of Design Engineering. No doubt an intelligent, far-sighted human being. Professor Rafael Calvo. So the statement he's making is about the system, how the system should be. Excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of my tea. You can't see it, but I'm having tea. Tea without sugar, only milk. So, what I would like to say at this point is, when you talk about civilized society, and in every civilized society there is the existence of government. There is no such people on earth where you have civilized society and no government. Can you think of an example where there's no government and civilization is holding itself together by the virtue and merit of its citizens, of its people, in history or in contemporary society? So it's a balancing act. It's not you come to a point and then it just is automated after that. It doesn't happen. Governments are active, people are active, and the two are in a relationship. And it's a power struggle. Unnecessarily, there should be, actually, ideally, there should be no continuous power struggle. As individuals and as groups, people believe many different things, they act in many different ways. The larger the society, the more complex the society, the functions of the government get more complicated alongside with that. So to make a blanket mandate for all of society, you're talking about different genders, you're talking about male, female, you're talking about, in my simple world, that's all I think of, male, female, that's it. You're talking about different age groups, that's where it gets more complicated. Then you're talking about different cultures in that society. And the timing of this pandemic, well, some people call it a plandemic, that was planned this way. And if you look at the evidence, it's not an unsubstantiated claim. There is planning behind it. Now, how much of intelligence and planning and predictive powers were at play, and how much you ascribe intelligence and wisdom to those making the plans and how much they are in control, it's all up to the observer, really. So I don't invest a lot of my time. If I invested my time working out the details, I'm sure I can build up a pretty complicated picture in my mind. That is not what I'm interested in. Excuse me, I'm more interested in my cough getting better actually, so I can make videos with the least disturbance for you and me. That is presently my concern. So, getting back to the point, excuse me, the relationship between government and people, public. This gentleman, Professor Rafael Calvo, is expecting a certain degree of trustworthiness of the public also. And at large, we believe in a civilized society, the public to be trustworthy. But if you look into society and you look at certain groups and individuals, you will find they make statements and live by the belief that the government is not to be trusted. And that is their view, based on the evidence and their understanding of evidence. And they keep looking to history, not even old, ancient history, but even recent history, just 100 years ago. What I often notice is that these people do fail to observe is how much the world has changed, primarily due to technological advancements. Not that human beings have changed. That is not something I observe. But yes, society and the way people interact, that has changed. The sharing of information and the means for sharing of information, that has changed. And if suddenly all this technology was to disappear, imagine waking up tomorrow, no internet. Our world would be facing a catastrophe very quickly, very, very quickly. So, in my view, the technology that enables communication, it's one of its prime functions, communicating and connecting people. It does so much else, but this is one of its prime functions. So you're understanding how I am discussing mandates, but where this is leading to. You're understanding that, right? I'm trying to make it as clear as possible. Let's focus again on this particular paper. And I would again say that majority of the people don't need to read papers. Who has got the time? If you don't have the time or the inclination or the ability or the aptitude, you're not going to be reading papers. And I'm also not of the mindset that I research everything to decide something. I don't. But here I'm looking at something, and when I'm looking at something, I'm going to do it justice. So let's look at this. Risk compensation and face mask mandates during the COVID-19 pandemic. This article came out in 2021. So already there was some information, a lot, to observe, to base the observations on. So in the abstract, it says face masks are an important component in controlling COVID-19. And policy orders to wear masks are common. Excuse me. However, behavioral responses are seldom additive, and exchanging one protective behavior for another could undermine the COVID-19 policy response. Just these two lines. And you can see the difference between the world of theory and the world of practice. And that is where often a man with instincts and common sense and grounded wisdom reaches a conclusion that science reaches later on. And in the meantime, a lot of time has gone by. So why submit to science when you can extract the same conclusions by listening to a wise person, if you can find a wise person? Now, look at the subject terms here: infectious diseases, environmental economics, health policy, and healthcare economics. So all those, I believe, keywords they are using in the subject terms are significant. And you can go through the study and you can look at even all these mathematical formulas they're using in the modeling. Excuse me. Is that a long article or what? It is a long article. Let's look at this. Points of interest: visitation. Americans increased trips to a variety of places in the weeks following the mask mandate. The greatest effects were for restaurants and other eating places, which could be dominated by takeout pickups, because we look at the count of visits and not time on site. This too became a subject for some kind of data analysis. Fisher 2020 reports that adults testing positive for COVID-19 were twice as likely to have dined at a restaurant relative to adults with negative tests. The next most affected locations were recreation locations, which includes parks, health and personal care, and florist, which may include gardening stores. Grocery stores and various merchant wholesalers did not appear to receive increased trips following the mask orders. So the kind of business. But even reading this, you come to think, or I come to think at least, okay, the government said wear a mask. Now, mandate, if the government said we recommend Americans should wear a mask, that's it. We recommend, we advise, based on what the science suggests. We recommend that people should wear masks. Just a general statement. And leave it up to businesses and people to follow it. It's when the government gets too specific, too involved, even in the individual decision making, when the problems start. Where did these problems come from? How did it go from a general statement, an advisory, to mandate? How did that happen? That has almost everything to do with human behavior and very little to do with medical science. And the virtue of government would have been established if the government made a general statement and those making the statement who themselves are in the government followed what they advised people to do, because they believed in the validity of their advice. If government officials who said, wear a mask, this is our recommendation, were wearing a mask. Somebody asked them, why are you wearing a mask? And the person working in the government said, I have symptoms of COVID-19. So I'm wearing a mask to keep the other person safe. The other person doesn't have to wear a mask. They're not obligated in any way to wear a mask. I'm symptomatic. I'm wearing a mask to protect the other person. End of discussion. The other person, if they said, well, I'm in proximity to a symptomatic person, my decision-making ability tells me I should wear a mask too. But that's their choice. And someone else said, well, I'm not keen to wear a mask. I don't want to wear a mask. I know the recommendation, but I choose not to. How did it come to the point where the police is involved, general public is involved, they turn a general statement into specifics about what kind of mask, how long to wear it, where to wear it, nobody's allowed here. All of that, I think the buildup was long before the pandemic, long before that. Suppose, I'm giving you an example, suppose you have a business and there's a certain person who comes in. You don't like that person, but they come into your shop every week. And whenever they come, they disturb other clients. A little bit irritation here, a little bit there, speaks to you in a way that you don't like, but you're doing it for your business. Now, the masking advice comes out, and gradually it has turned into a mandate. Now you have an excuse to disallow that person from entering your shop because you were already looking for an excuse for that person not to come to your business, to your shop, and now you have a basis to stop them. So what do? You use the excuse, and 10 people get beside you. Those 10 people are irritated by that one person, and they get behind you and say, yes, this person should be wearing a mask. Excuse me. And you were always confident this is the sort of person who will not be wearing a mask. You were always sure about that. And now your hypothesis has been proven that yes, this is the sort of person who wouldn't wear a mask, and he is not willing. And finally, it comes to the point where this person, if he doesn't listen to you and the other 10 people and disregards what has now become a mandate, you call the police. 2 officers show up and drag him out of your shop. Now you can be certain this person is not coming back to your shop. But it all happened because of behaviors. Where did the science and medicine go in all of that? Has hardly anything to do with science and medicine at this point. We're going on nearly 30 minutes. Here's another important article because it says COVID-19 and vaccine mandates. And of course, I'm going to leave the link for this article in the video description. But here we have 2 people, Nancy Cass and Saad Omer. So the question I like here is, when in a public health crisis is it time to consider mandates? Nancy Cass, what she says: public health rarely starts with a mandate as plan A. Thank goodness. In general, public health will do exactly what happened with COVID vaccines, which is try to help the public understand why a vaccine is effective, how a vaccine is safe, and execute its responsibility for making it accessible in all senses of the word: cost, location, language. If it turns out that doing all of those things leads to sufficient coverage, mandates aren't needed. You're able to maximize the ethical goal of respecting people's autonomy and freedoms and maximize the benefits that we need from a public health perspective. Excuse me. Well, at this point, um, I'll just interject and say, well, as far as language or information is concerned, it is not taking into account misinformation. Can misinformation come from public health officials? Yes, it can. And can misinformation come from those who believe they're in a position to advise others and are not really capable, but they do it anyway? That can happen too. It happens. So, what really is misinformation? Misinformation would be inaccurate information. Um, and it can come from different sources. It can come from any source, actually. But as far as, suppose somebody has a question about the vaccine, about mRNA vaccines. What are the ingredients of the mRNA vaccine made by Pfizer? Let's forget about Moderna even. This vaccine is mandated, the one made by Pfizer. What are its ingredients? I want to know. How is this vaccine made? Is there information available about the ingredients of the mRNA vaccine made by Pfizer? Yes, there is. You can look on the CDC website and you will find the information. Or it's on the FDA website. I was going through that information this morning itself. Now, if that information is inaccurate, because Pfizer lied to the FDA and to the CDC, now that is serious, because the manufacturer is lying about its own product. Now that is the job of the FDA and the CDC to check that Pfizer is telling them correctly, because they are the intermediary. They are the barrier before it comes to the general public. So the FDA and the CDC have to check that Pfizer is telling them the truth. And it would be the same thing. I'm using a computer here. It says it uses an AMD Ryzen 7 64-bit processor. Now, I've been using this for a year now, almost a year. And if I find out that this computer made by HP, the manufacturer does not use the AMD Ryzen 7 processor for which I paid. Instead, it uses a different processor. I have every right to take HP to court. I and any other client, any other customer who bought this computer in good faith, that this processor is working in this computer, I have every right to take them to court and say HP has lied to me and to all the other customers who paid for this computer in good faith and bought it. And once it is established, of course, we can sue the company. Same thing with Pfizer. If Pfizer is lying about the ingredients, every person who has been injected, regardless of adverse effects, for those who have experience adverse effects. But if Pfizer lies about the ingredients of the vaccine, they can be held to account for that, for lying to FDA, for lying to the CDC, and through them, lying to everyone else. But if they're telling the truth, if there's full disclosure on Pfizer's website, if there's full disclosure through the FDA and CDC, they are exactly the ingredients that they say are in the vaccine. The standard by which we know if there is a recall by the FDA, we know that they mentioned there are 10 ingredients. There's an 11th ingredient found, which was actually an impurity. On the basis of that 11th ingredient, which is not supposed to be there, FDA can issue a recall and say, this batch of the vaccine has one other ingredient other than the 10 disclosed by Pfizer. And this batch of vaccines is to be called back. It's actually the manufacturer's responsibility to make that disclosure, that finding and disclosure, and report it to FDA. But whoever comes across this information, you see there's a standard. The standard is the company truthfully says, this is how we have built this vaccine, these are the ingredients. If something deviates from that, if they change the formula, if they change the ingredients, now that is no longer the same vaccine. A case like that of a recall publicly given out on social network and on the FDA's website was about remdesivir. Glass particulates were found in a batch of remdesivir. The company informed the FDA, and the FDA issued a recall for that batch of remdesivir because glass particulates are not supposed to be in remdesivir, and there was a manufacturing problem, and it was disclosed, and the batch was recalled. The hospitals where that batch went did not use it. They were not supposed to use it. I don't want to say they did not use it, because that's what I believe. They did not use it. The recall was given out in sufficient time. But that's what is supposed to happen. But the information went out to everyone, not only the hospital. The information went out to everyone. Suppose there were 5 hospitals where the batch went, or 2 hospitals. But the information is made public to everyone, internationally. Not just those centers where the batches went. That is the power of the internet. That is the power of modern technology. And people who have never studied these things or examined them are really in the dark. They don't know how much the world has changed. It's on your awareness, it's on your active involvement, but the world has changed. This is how it has changed in communication. I would leave the link for this article also, because it has some very important questions. What makes an effective mandate? Is somebody by the name So, S-O. I take a middle of the road approach to vaccine mandates. Some people think that the only way to implement a mandate is a draconian approach of picking up people from their homes and jabbing them with a shot. That's not how modern mandates work. They're tied to a benefit, a privilege, or a service, and getting vaccinated becomes a condition of availing yourself of that opportunity. Excuse me. Again, different people would look at it differently. If there is incentivization for vaccine, they would think, well, why the incentive? Why tie it to a benefit? Just leave it to the individual. They see the benefit in getting vaccinated. That is good enough in itself. Why do you want to attach a benefit, a privilege, or a service to getting vaccinated? Is that a valid point? Yes, it is a valid point, and Peter McCullough made that point in one of the videos, and I respect him for making that point. And now, society is complex. Of course, there are all kinds of people in a society, and government is dealing with all those different kinds of people. Peter McCullough is at a different level, intellectually, as a human being. His integrity, his intelligence, his knowledge, his experience. Is everybody going to be at the same level as him? Of course not. Of course not. Even his associates would not be at the same level as he is. But the government has to deal with all kinds of people. All kinds. So, the fact that mandates came into the picture during this time should be a lesson for the future, because this is not the last challenge humankind is going to face. We have to take our lessons from this experience. Another paper, I'm not going to read this, analysis of the effects of COVID-19 mask mandates on hospital resource consumption and mortality at the county level. I think this is another important paper. How long? It's a long read. If you really want to read it thoroughly, let's jump to conclusions. I don't like to do that, but I am doing it in this case. We were unable to detect a reduction in per population daily mortality, hospital bed, ICU bed, or ventilator occupancy attributable to the implementation of a mask order. Footnotes, references. Look at the number of references. 39 references. Including 39th is from Hubei province in Wuhan City. All those references. But I read the conclusion to you, and I leave it to you to go through the paper. What methods they use, objectives, etc., etc. Risk compensation and face mask mandates during the COVID-19 pandemic. Scientific reports. Another one from nature.com. Excuse me. The arguments in favor of masks claim that they do no harm, are low cost, and they may provide benefits. However, the cost of face mask orders is more than the price of a mask. Most recommendations are for cloth masks and non-medical masks because of concerns that the opportunity cost of masks might be high, given the scarcity of masks for medical personnel. Evidence suggests cloth masks are less effective than N95 respirators. A more insidious cost exists if individuals substitute mask wearing for other protective behaviors. Risk compensation. If people spend more time in public spaces because they wear masks and believe they're protected, then recommendations to wear masks in public may create a perverse incentive. Furthermore, messaging around wearing masks could create a false impression of safety. A corollary is that mask orders may provide confidence to help people re-engage as the pandemic is controlled if people otherwise overestimate the risk of infection. You see what they're saying? Do you understand what they're saying? That masking, just generally like this, out in the public, is only a nominal benefit. Apart from certain conditions where masks are worn for a limited period of time, following the protocol, other than that, just wearing these cloth masks and being out in the public day in, day out, it could even be counterproductive. It is counterproductive. So I'd like for you to read this read this paper, and then there are special considerations again, all this calculations that they've done and whatnot. Is this reproduced from somewhere else? I might have looked at this from Feb 4 February 2021. And then this is the last one. The CDC Field Epidemiology Manual. Legal considerations. What are these legal considerations about? This is from the Epidemic Intelligence Service. And what I was looking at earlier, there's something I came across in this article, which if you hear it for the first time, you might also be a bit surprised. Well, it's a very long article, actually. And I might have skipped that place where I came across something. I'm trying to find that. But this is an important document. And I'm not able to find that place right now where I read something. Well, let's not even look at the federal government, just the state legal authorities. A state's inherent police powers provide state and local health officials broad authority to conduct field epidemiology. As a practical matter, institutions and individuals generally voluntarily cooperate in epidemiologic investigations. However, just as many field investigations require support from competent laboratory staff, a field investigation also may require support from competent legal staff when voluntary cooperation is not forthcoming. If an investigator meets with resistance, state and local public health officials may need the assistance of their general counsel or their state's attorney general for such actions as applying for a court order to compel an entity or individual to grant investigators access to premises or records. Although assistance from legal counsel might never be needed, it is a good idea nonetheless to identify the attorney or legal office that can supply legal advice and support before the epidemiologic investigation begins. In addition to the legal authorities that enable health agencies to undertake epidemiologic investigations, myriad related considerations exist regarding responsibilities and authorities for the individual elements of an investigation. Such considerations encompass the authorities necessary to obtain microbiological and other laboratory specimens from hospitals and private laboratories, review patients' medical records kept in the offices of physicians, dentists, and other healthcare providers, administer questionnaires to and collect specimens from persons affected in the outbreak. Now, this is at the state level. Doesn't mean this is what the state has to do or can, what they can, according to what is written. And just these are the things written down. Now, just because they're written down doesn't mean they're correct. Let's also accept that. But this is their manual from the CDC. And one can understand where these powers, if they're written down and accepted, can lead to. It just has to fall in the wrong hands, and these powers that are written off. General legal authorities. Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution authorizes Congress to impose taxes to provide for the general welfare of the United States and to regulate interstate commerce. The epidemiologic investigations conducted by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and members of the U.S. Public Health Service are examples of federal activities that are generally supported by these authorities. Under the authority of the U.S. Constitution's Commerce Clause, the federal government also oversees such health-related activities as the inspection of meat, poultry, and other foods, the regulation of drugs, biologic products, and medical devices, and the regulation of biological agents that have the potential to pose a severe threat to public health and safety. Although the provisions in the U.S. Constitution are broad, the activities of the federal government relating to health and welfare nonetheless must fit within these enumerated powers. Additionally, the Bill of Rights can restrain the exercise of federal authority. Just looking at this document, and I'm thinking to myself, one can understand why there are people, individuals and groups of people, who don't trust the government. They're just going about their life. And actually, the way it should be is that people simply going about their life should not be bothered with the government. And the government shouldn't bother them. They're just living their life. They're not doing anything wrong. However, where people get involved in these sort of things and they can cause harm to themselves and others, in today's day and age, the government has the means to exercise its power very specifically and to identify causes of threat. So, should there be a fear of the government? Of course, there should be a fear of the government, especially for those who are involved in wrongdoing. Those who are going to cause harm to themselves and especially to others. So there has to be fear of the government. But the government is not some virtuous body, flawless and free of error. Hardly the case. That's why some people take great delight in finding faults in their leaders, because they can point to their flaws and say, well, if that's how you are, then who are you to check on who I am and what I do? Very common to see in the United States, actually. So, well, I'm almost going on 1 hour. Almost, not exactly 1 hour, it's 53, 54 minutes. So, in a nutshell, mandates and how they're responded to. On the surface, the mandate looks very simple. Wear a mask, here's a mandate. Get vaccinated, here's a mandate. When you look into it deeply, you see how one blanket mandate is so complicated under the surface. You can look at every fiber of the mandate as it works through individuals in a society. Isn't that true? So that's why I started searching on the effect of mandates on the general public, and I believe I am better informed and I understand it better. And although I can think for myself, which I often do, I like to get informed to further educate my thinking. And I'm not subservient to any of the information that I've gone through, any of it. But I do look through what has been found based on evidence. That is the important thing. Evidence is very important. So this is an example, you could say. This is an example of me doing some research. Now, I research a lot of things. This just happens to be something that I'm researching at present, and I'll be sharing this with all of you. So if you stayed along for this boring research, thank you. Thank you for your time. And thank you for your attention. You get to know me a little better, at least. I don't get to know you that well, but you get to know me a little better. And this is all the time I'm going to spend here. I'm done. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.